It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Well, aloha and good morning. Thanks for starting off your week here with us on Spotlight Hawaii. I'm Ryan Kalesuji. Yanji Denise actually has the next few weeks off on vacation, and so you're stuck with me as we lead through some of the conversations over the next few weeks. Of course, we here at Spotlight Hawaii spotlight some of the issues that are impacting our community. And this morning, we focus our attention on the city budget and head over to Honolulu Hale, where joining me now this morning is Andy Kawano, Honolulu Budget and Fiscal Services Director under the Blangiardi administration. Thanks, Andy, for joining me this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
You know, we actually had a conversation last month. The mayor brought you into his interview, and so we got a kind of an update on the budget. And so we thought we'd take a deeper dive to talk about some of the issues and some of the things that you're tackling with right now as you formulate this budget. But before we begin, I'm wondering if you can give us just a broad sense of where we're at in this budgeting process and how we got to this point for those who may not be familiar with the process of how this budget is formulated after the mayor presents it to the council.
Well, first of all, I think it's important for everyone to know that the budget process is an annual process. So as soon as the budget for FY24 is adopted by council, and we're hoping that adoption happens on Wednesday, we do the third reading on Wednesday, we essentially start the budget process again come July 2023 for the following fiscal year. So we're actually going to be focusing on getting instructions out in late July, August, that time frame, to start the FY25. So the July 1st, 2024 through June 30, 2025 budget. And we receive feedback from all city agencies. Typically by September, our budget team and their analysts pour through the budgets, ask questions, and typically in the November, December timeframe, we include the managing director, deputy managing director, the department directors, and we go through the budget proposals by department and kind of comb through everything and work to get to final budgeting numbers. In about late January, our real property assessment division will certify the real property tax assessment for the upcoming fiscal year for FY25 in this case that I'm talking about. And we finalize our real property tax revenue estimates at that time. And we pull together final budget numbers in the early February timeframe. At that point, we work on our communication plan, the two budget books, the operating budget book, executive operating budget book, and the capital improvement projects budget book. The budget books get finalized, get posted on March 2nd, get distributed to council. And typically within a week, we do presentations by city department or city agency, and the directors present their department budgets to council members in a public forum, during a special committee on budget meeting, and answer questions. So we answer questions at that time, and within about a week and a half from that point, all of the council members submit to the budget committee head. We call that person the budget chair, and currently it's Radian Cordero. So they would submit to the budget chair their input as to amendments to the budget. Budget chair looks at the amendments and puts together a proposed draft, council draft 1. That council draft 1 gets reviewed during a follow-up committee on budget meeting to have public discussion about the amendments and along the way, anything in the budget. And then we go to full council for the second reading at that time. Oh, I'm sorry, the first reading. And we go through the process again, same process. and we get a second council draft, and typically in about the April timeframe, that draft goes through another full council meeting, and goes through what they call the second reading, and we go through more public discussion. We answer council questions, and then typically in May there's discussion on specific remaining issues, and we typically work to get to the third reading that will include floor drafts by council members to make final amendments to the budget. So it's an annual process, and we have a department that or division, of budget and fiscal services that primarily focuses on the budget on an annual basis. The division is broken down into two groups. We have a CIP and revenue group, and then we have a the administrative budget group that focuses on the operating budget. So it's an annual process.
Yeah, let's sort of focus on where we're at right now in this process, and some of the discussion, specific things that, with council members finding agreements over some of the suggested changes to the proposed budget as it stands right now. This includes, a tax credit, a one-time tax credit. I know that there was some discussion about what that could include. There's also some discussion over how much money for CIP remains in there. What are some of those final agreements that need to be finalized coming on Wednesday?
One of the big issues this year as we entered into the budget process was the fact that, we had going into FY23 large property tax assessments. So that was discussed. And we had a second year of larger assessments in general for FY25. So we, every December 15th, we send notices out to taxpayers on Oahu on their property tax assessments. And the past December 15th of 2022, we announced a second year of larger property tax assessment increases. So one of the things that we had to do was think about, there's significant concern by the public. What can we do immediately to provide relief? And the mayor decided on, as you brought up, Ryan, to provide a one-time tax credit to get some relief started right away for the upcoming fiscal 24 year, which starts on July 1st, 2023. And we proposed a $300 tax credit to people that live at home that have the homeowners exemption. So that's about 152,000 parcels of homeowners, related to homeowners. And we proposed that in the floor drafts that we've been looking at. The council members are going to propose adding a little more to that, $50 more. So we're going to get up to about $350. And at that amount, a tax credit of $350 equates to an additional homeowners exemption of $100,000. So, depending on where you are, in terms of the value of your property, if you're a homeowner, let's say at the average, $1 million, having a $350 tax exemption is equivalent, tax credit is equivalent to having an exemption of $100,000. So if your tax increased 10% over the prior year and you were at $1 million in the prior year, hypothetically, you would have been at $1.1 million. That extra $100,000 would be, removed by this tax credit. So, the relief would get provided, immediately. If you're in a condo and you have a homeowner's exemption on a condo that's worth, let's say, $600,000, and let's say the condo increased by your assessment increased by 10%, so $60,000, you actually would have a reduction of your tax assessed base to an amount below $600,000. The one-time credit will allow taxpayers to get, tax relief down to a minimum of $300. So there's a $300 minimum tax that everyone would pay. but the impact could be significant depending on your situation. And the mayor kept the tax credit flat because the thought was people that live in homes that are not as high, in terms of the assessed valuation, would get more of the benefit. Those that live in multi-million-dollar homes will get a smaller, impact, from the credit. And the thought was we help those that are most in need first, and we moved ahead with that. So that's where we are right now for the tax credit. For
sorry, go
ahead, Ryan.
If we can just stay on this tax credit for now, before we maybe go back into some of the other portions of the agreements that are being managed and discussed with this budget right now. The last time we spoke to Chair Waters, he talked about the value of this one-time tax credit, but really was pushing for something that would be more long-term to support the rising cost of living overall, more than just a one-time tax credit. Do you think that's feasible, given that there are a number of vacancies that still need to be filled? There's a number of services, of course, that are required of the city government and operations. Beyond just this maybe one-time credit, is this something that we could foresee moving forward as beyond just this one-time event, but something more long-term?
I think we can look at it. Some of our good example, we have a low-income tax credit that requires a filing annually, but to qualify for this credit, the combined income of a household, based on the individuals that are on the deed, listed on the deed, they're the owners of the home, cannot exceed $60,000. That income limit has been in place for years. I think from 2014, if I recall right, and it hasn't changed. So we could look at increasing that limit, but we have to be very careful. And to your point, there are vacancies that we have to fill. And on top of that, even if our vacancies remain on hold, in terms of amount, we have pay increases that are going to kick in from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25. And those pay increases are significant. We're looking at salaries and benefits tied to salaries, creating a combined increase in what we're going to have to fund in FY25 of $160 million. So that's a huge number we're going to have to fund. We also have rail that we're going to learn more on as we start interim operations on June 30th. We're going to start accumulating information on not just the operating characteristics, but also our costs, our operating costs. And we're going to have a better feel as to what it's going to cost going forward to operate rail. So you're right. There's increased costs on one side of the equation. In terms of tax relief on the revenue side, we can look at various options, in providing relief, but we're going to have to be, I think, careful and deliberate, and be mindful that we have costs to cover going forward.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of discussion about this, the property tax valuation skyrocketing, over the last few years. And there are many homeowners who are just overall concerned that this could continue to increase over time, and thus maybe looking for something more long-term. Do you think that homeowners should be worried about the continuing rise at such a rapid rate right now? And what are some of the things that the city is doing to just navigate that, knowing that this could be a continued increase, something that, of course, the city doesn't control, but with these valuations continue to go up, how do you manage and find that balance?
We're working, I'll talk about the future later, but we're working closely with the council member team, and council members a few weeks ago set up a permitted interaction group to review and discuss tax relief going forward. And this is beyond fiscal year 2024, and we were invited to participate with them, and we reviewed more than 30 bills that are active that could impact real property taxes. The bills were categorized by credits, tax credits. They were grouped by situations that involve homeowners exemption and the amount of the exemption. We looked at the group of bills that involve other types of exemptions, dedications to homeowner taxpayers. And then finally, we looked at bills that consider restructuring, the tax classification system that's used, to assess and determine tax valuations for all of our taxpayers on the island. So we went through a first round of discussions with council members. They met on their own in the final meeting, and I thought the discussions went well. And we have a plan, and there are some changes that are going to be proposed during the third reading of our budget bill this Wednesday on the 7th. And there was talk of having more joint discussions in a second permitted interaction group later in the year to talk about the tax classification system and our other larger issues, including relief for long-term renters. And again, Ryan, as I mentioned, our costs to continue city services are going to go up. In the future, and we're going to have to, go through this process of discussing permanent relief very deliberately, and understand that we still have to fund government and services that we provide to the public.
Another issue that we had just kind of breezed over, but want to get back to, was capital improvement projects. And that's obviously a big part of the budget. And those discussions are continuing to move forward over what sort of takes precedence and what actually gets funded within that CIP budget. What are some of the larger ticket items that the mayor is really advocating for as these discussions come down to the wire here over what project gets funded? What are some of those things that the mayor is hoping to advocate for and see get approved by the council?
Okay, so the mayor's approved capital improvements budget for FY24, fiscal year 2024, totaled about $1.1 billion. So when we issued the proposed budget early in March, it was at $1.1 billion. About half of that amount relates to sanitation projects, so wastewater, solid waste, mostly wastewater. As you know, the city has consent decree requirements to upgrade our plant, our water filtration plant, and catchment systems. And we have a number of projects working on that. We have to go to stage 2 treatment before letting treated wastewater out into the ocean. So the big focus area, first of all, would be the Sand Island Treatment Center, and then at the same time, Honolulu. And then we have other treatment facilities around this island that also require, investment and, upgrade. So that's half the budget going to sanitation. One of the mayor's focal areas working with our state partners is to increase the housing inventory with a focus on affordable housing. So the mayor included a proposal of $100 million to, acquire, develop, construct more affordable housing units on this island. And council members support it, and they have actually introduced additional monies in their amendments that are going to be, reviewed on Wednesday. So, there's a possibility that, strong possibility that the mayor's $100 million could be doubled up, along with some additional funding for homeless sheltering and other homeless wraparound services for those in need.
Another thing that you briefly discussed and touched upon was the rail, and just looking at that and how that will impact the city budget moving forward with interim services, as you said, starting next month. How are you crafting that budget? What are you looking towards in terms of operational costs for this, and how adding this, of course, long-awaited program and service will potentially impact the budget moving forward and all future budgets moving forward of including this within the budget and the operating expenses?
Again, it's going to be a learning process. Some of the budget, it will include buying more buses and start to electrify the bus fleet that we have. So we're looking at electric battery run buses. We're also going to invest in handy van. And part of the reason why is not only to modernize an aging fleet, but also to ensure that we have good service at the interim stop that we have from June 30 on. So the rail will operate from Kapolei to Aloha Stadium initially. So we're going to need timely bus pickup to get passengers to their destination. So we need to make sure we have that in place. In addition to that, we're going to assess how rail impacts bus usage, along the rail line, and make adjustments to bus routes, frequency, and so on as we have more information on that. So you're right, rail will impact transit. There's going to be a learning period where we analyze how bus, handy van, rail work together, and the impacts they have on those core services that we provide. And it's going to be interesting going forward.
Another thing that kind of made headlines recently is Chair Waters also is urging the administration to provide hazard pay for city employees who work during the COVID-19 pandemic. That compensation, as he said, could include up to $13 per hour for essential work. Have you had this discussion with the mayor, and what do you think of this proposal and any impact that it may have on the city's finances?
Well, we don't have final numbers yet. We understand that Maui is in the process of settling on the hazard pay issue. And, as a result, the mayor and his administration have decided that, we're going to move forward looking at a settlement. But, we haven't gone through all of the calculations yet. That's going to be upcoming. It's probably going to be expensive and may require payment over more than a year, may require a multiple year payout. And it may require using, other forms of payment other than compensation.
One of the things that we always bring up with the mayor, and he always likes to talk about, is just the vacant city positions and the importance these positions have to filling basic operations for city government. And we briefly talked about this earlier, but I'm wondering if we can circle back to some of those vacant positions. I mean, how are you leveraging this budget, and as you're crafting this, looking at, as you said, pay increases to maybe make things more appealing for some of these positions, if there's ways to consolidate some of these vacant positions to save money? How do you factor all of those variables in when looking at the need of trying to fill these vacant positions and the impact that it has directly on the community?
We're looking at all different options to address the problem. The first thing we had to do was assess our needs, and we do that on a department by department basis. We looked at our processes, working with my department, Budget and Fiscal Services, and Department of Human Resources, to ensure that our approval process, our process of getting a list of candidates to departments for hiring, and the interview and selection processes are being done more efficiently. Because as the mayor mentioned earlier in his interviews, on average, it was taking approximately 6 months to hire employees from the approval process to the very end, bringing people on board and onboarding. And, our goal is to cut that time in half. It seems like it's still a long time. Unfortunately, we're a government operation, and there are a lot of rules and laws that we have to comply with. And, we're working through that to shorten the time, because if you take too long, people are going to find jobs elsewhere. And, we lose out at the end. So we're looking at that. We're looking at how we recruit, where we recruit, looking at using more social media approaches to making the outreach to possible job candidates. and looking at organizations and working with the University of Hawaii and other local universities like Chaminade and HPU to do recruiting for the city. As you mentioned, we've had to embrace the fact that during the pandemic, even before that, a lot of experienced city employees retired or left the city, took a lot of institutional knowledge along the way, and we're in the process of filling positions that are needed so that we can carry out services effectively to serve the public. So it's going to be there's no silver bullet. It's going to take effort by everyone involved, and it's going to take a number of years to address it. It will not happen overnight. We're not going to fill those vacancies overnight. It's going to take a number of years to make a significant dent in terms of where we are.
We only have a few moments left, but just wanted to end by, of course, I know that you're trying to wrap things up with this budget and then beginning to look forward already to next year and crafting that budget. And as you look forward to the future and the next few years, I'm wondering if you can speak to just what we're seeing with the economic forecasts and projections, of course, by the Council of Revenues, and taking in all those factors. I mean, what do you think the approach will be as you begin to formulate and think about the next budget moving forward?
Well, as I talk to our budget team, we're definitely concerned about the interest rate situation, across the nation. Inflation is still sticky. There has been improvement from last year, but we're not at where we have to be. And as you listen to the various news outlets and listen to people in the know on the mainland and the government, the Fed and so on, there's probably not going to be decreases as we thought perhaps a few months ago, in terms of reductions. Interest rates are probably going to be high. So the impact, higher. So the impact for the rest of this year and probably into next year is that we're thinking that real property taxes and more specifically the assessments that we come up with next year will probably not increase like they have during the past 2 years, and will in effect flatten out maybe to the historical average, which has been about 5% per year, or even perhaps even lower. So we know that the increases probably, we can't forecast the future, will probably be a lot less, or maybe there could be a flattening per se. So with that in mind, and with the fact that we know that our expenses are going to increase, we talked about pay increases, benefit increases. We're going to be in the final year of the last collective bargaining settlement that we agreed to just a few years ago. We're going to have to start a new period again soon for collective bargaining. But going from fiscal year 2024 to 25, the final year of collective bargaining increases kick in. So we're going to have to factor that in. You brought up hazard pay. There's a need for more public safety. We get that kind of feedback, not just on land on Oahu, but around all of our shores. Water safety officers, lifeguards are being asked to set up stations in areas not covered. So there's all of this continued request for services. So we're going to have to balance that with revenue projections that we get our hands around as we move into fiscal year 24.
Well, we know that this is a very busy time for you, and so we really appreciate you just taking time to give us an update on where things are at, and look forward to future discussions once the budget gets finalized, and we can maybe go through some of the more details with you and the mayor. But Honolulu Budget and Fiscal Services Director Andy Kawano, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you again for having me.
Aloha. Well, great to hear from them and get him and get an update on where things stand with the city budget. We covered a lot of things, including the entire process and where things are at right now. You heard from him that there are going to be some major decisions that will be made by the council on Wednesday that could really determine some of the still looming issues or some of the looming agreements that have yet to be finalized with this budget. A large part of that includes that one-time proposed tax credit. The mayor had initially suggested $300. You heard from the director this morning saying that the council is pushing forth and moving forward with a potential idea of adding $50 to that. So $350 to expand that. That discussions would also have to be approved and will be discussed in those conversations. We also talked about just the long-term tax relief and some of the things and efforts and plans to go beyond just this one-time tax credit, but looking for other options. And you heard the director say there that they are thinking and have been having discussions with council members to look how they can find relief for homeowners who have been seeing some of those property valuations skyrocket over the last few years and really try to get a handle on how things are going there. We also heard from him, of course, the capital improvement project, CIP, always a big part of the city budget. And you heard from Director Kawano there about some of the issues and some of the things that they'll continue to have to also finalize in this council meeting on Wednesday, but that a large portion of the CIP budget, which was $1.1 billion as part of the mayor's initial budget that he proposed, half of that will be going towards wastewater treatment, of course, and that important. So a large portion of that budget will be going towards directly that issue, but also noting that there are other things. Of course, affordable housing continues to be an issue. That is also included within that CIP budget. And we also heard from him about how rail will impact this budget moving forward. Of course, the interim service of the rail line getting started in July. And so discussions are already happening on how they will need to support the rail, including more electric buses that are being added to the fleet, handy vans. And this will help to, of course, move people as this interim service will end at Aloha Stadium to continue that transportation efforts into town until the full rail is done. And so finding additional funding for those types of services. But you heard from the director there also noting that there are increases that are going to be happening within the city budget, not only for some of these vacancies to make them more attractive, but also because of pay raises that the city is required to fulfill in the next year, which will all add up as they continue to craft this budget moving forward. He also said this hazard pay proposal for COVID-19 employees of the city could also have a significant impact on the budget. And so we'll have to wait and see how things pan out there at Honolulu Hale. And moving forward, we'll continue to keep you posted on what's happening there with the final budget. On Wednesday, we're switching gears. We're going to be talking to two real estate experts who are going to give us a little bit of an update on where things stand in Hawaii's real estate market. And of course, some of the interest rates really impacting sales as well as what buyers are comfortable with right now. We're going to take a look at both the residential and commercial side to see how things are shaping up thus far here in the middle of 2023. We look forward to seeing you here on Wednesday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Aloha.